Amen. It is really good to see all of you here today. We know many of you are worshiping with us online. So many familiar faces here today as well. I think Matt said this a moment ago. This is one of our favorite times of year because it's one of those times where we get to see family who has gone off and come here, and a lot of times even staying for worship together. So whatever the case is, we're glad that you're here today, and our prayers that God has been praised and magnified already, but also that you've been edified by being here. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, whatever that looked like for you. And now we come together with that same spirit of gratitude, and we give thanks to our Lord for all He's done for us. Today we're continuing a series we started a couple of weeks ago on the love languages, and you can see that on the screen. You see this behind me. We're looking at these 5 different love languages right now. These are basically just ways that people know they're loved. And we're looking at this because the idea here is that by examining each one of these individually, we hope that we can better love the people in our lives. And even more pointedly than that, we hope to do that because we want to be faithful to what Jesus told us to do when He said that we ought to love one another. If we have experienced His love, if we have received His love, then we in turn want to impart that. We want to love people in the way of Jesus. So last week we looked at this first one here. We talked about words of affirmation. I won't ask you how your homework went this week, but I hope that you had some time to share with someone about, just how much you appreciate them. You probably at some point over the last few days have been around family or friends or dear loved ones. And so we want to love people well, like Jesus loved people well, by using those words of affirmation. So that was the first one that we looked at. And now today we want to kind of focus in on the second of these love languages, and that is the love language of quality time. Some of us here, our emotional tanks get really full whenever we have quality time with our loved ones. If you show me how you spend your time, then I think, show you the things that you really love. Because the way that we spend our time is an indicator of what we love. Would you agree? I mean, the things that we spend our time doing, that's an indication of what we really love. It's been said before that time is more valuable than money. Time is more valuable than money. What that means is this: if you need to borrow money from a friend, you can do that. If you need to take out a loan, you can go to the bank. You can find people who might loan you money, but you can never borrow time. It's just not the way it works. You can get only so many hours, right? There's 24 hours in a day. There are 168 hours in a week, if my math is right there. In that regard, time is priceless. You don't get more of it when it's gone. Time and money are similar in one regard. We do talk about how we spend them. You spend money and you spend time. But even though you spend time, you can't store it. Money, you can set some aside. You can store it, you can save it. Maybe you've been saving up for Cyber Monday for tomorrow. You can save money, but you can't save time. It is what it is. You can't store it up. And money and fame can't buy you more time. That's why the scriptures talk about making the most of our time, or in the passage that we just read before we sang that last song, what it means for us in the old King James language to redeem the time. I love that. Time is one of our most precious commodities, and you know that. We live that. And one of the best uses of our time, then, is to use it, to spend it, what time we have, to spend it loving people well. And that's really what I want us to think about here in our time together this morning. If you think about it, that is really one of the reasons that we've even gathered here this morning. We have gathered because we believe in the importance of spending our time doing something to honor the Lord. Worship itself, everything that we've just been engaged in, from the time of singing to the time of fellowship to the time of communion that John led us in a moment ago, now reflecting a little more deeply on the scriptures, all of that is a way of prioritizing our time and saying to God, okay, we devote this part of ourselves, of our heart and our mind and our souls and our time to you because you matter, God. Worship is a way of giving God the first fruits of our week. We gather here on Sunday because of this tradition that goes all the way back to the resurrection. But I love that on the first day of the week, we set aside this time and give it to God who is holy. In fact, that word holiday, it's really just a mashup of the words holy and day. And if you look through the scriptures, you find all the time God's people are being told of the importance of making certain times holy. So in the Old Testament, you see certain times in the year that come up regularly. Like, we celebrate Thanksgiving, we celebrate Christmas. Well, in the Jewish calendar, there are a lot of those annual sorts of days. And I've listed just a few of them here. Passover, John spoke about that a moment ago. Pentecost, the Day of Atonement. Okay, so there are all these feasts that are laid out. You read about it in Leviticus if you want to. But the idea there is that those days, once a year, were set aside, they were set apart, they were made sacred, they were made holy. Because God himself is set apart and sacred and holy. And then God gave his people not only those annual times, but he also gave them a weekly holy day, and that's the Sabbath day. He says in Exodus chapter 20, in the 10 Commandments, he says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. There's an observance of Sabbath that makes it holy time. Scholars and theologians like to call it sacralizing time. What does that mean in normal person speak? It's just a way of saying we want to set aside a little bit of time and make it holy because God is set apart and he is holy. And so the Jewish Sabbath observance, it was about setting aside sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday and not working, but resting and reflecting on who God was and giving thanks for all that he had done for you. And even though we don't observe Sabbath in the same way that the Israelites did under that older covenant, would you agree, though, prioritizing time for the Lord, that continues to be a really important concept? And those Old Testament practices, those patterns you see there in the Old Testament, they really set the stage then for what we see coming about in the New Testament as well, where you have the early church gathering together like this to worship on the first day of the week. And you see numerous examples of this in the scriptures. That was a time going all the way back to the resurrection itself. That was a time that was set apart, that was made holy for God. In John chapter 20, it says that the disciples were gathered together there on the first day of the week, on that resurrection Sunday. And other places, in Acts chapter 20, Luke talks about when they were in Troas and how they gathered together there on the first day of the week. They gathered to break bread, to observe this time of communion that we just took part in together. Paul elsewhere, 1 Corinthians 16, he tells the believers there, on the first day when you're assembled, collect that money, the collection for the saints in Jerusalem, so that you won't have to do that when I get there, which implies that they were together and they were worshiping and they were contributing already there on that first day of the week. All that to say this, okay, it's not a stretch for us. As we look at the examples in the New Testament and in the Old Testament as well, it's not a stretch for us to say that we're here today because we believe in the importance of quality time with our brothers and sisters in Christ. Many of you are here with your family. You prioritize coming together as a family to worship with this family, but your individual family too. And then most importantly, prioritizing that time and giving it to God. So I want you to think just about your earthly relationships, about your human relationships, your friends, your family, your spouse, your children. Quality time, that is a key component of any relationship. So what do we mean by quality time? Let's kind of take this a little deeper. Well, for one, here's what it's not, okay? It's not just spending time together. It's not just downtime together. We have to kind of begin there because it's easy for us to think that we're just talking about time. And if we're just talking about time, then all we have to do is kind of just sit in the same room together. And that is, maybe an important part of having downtime. Everybody needs a little bit of downtime, okay? And that could be a little sliver maybe of your quality time. But for a lot of us, downtime these days amounts to basically what I would call scrolling in proximity or screening in proximity. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, so you're on your phone, kind of doing this, right? You're in one part of the room. You're technically in the same room, but you're kind of doing this, and he's over there watching the football game. So he has a different screen, and you happen to be sitting next to each other, okay? And so technically you're in the same room, you're in the same zip code, and but is that quality time? No. That's downtime. That's not quality time, and downtime's not bad, okay? Like, don't go home and say, like, the preacher says downtime is bad. Like, you weren't listening if that's what you went home and said, okay? Downtime is great. It's just not what we're talking about here with quality time. We're talking about something that's different, okay? On the flip side, though, quality time isn't this either. It doesn't mean that you just have to, like, turn off the TV and sit there all night staring into each other's eyes, okay? That's creepy. Also, like, don't do that. That's not what we're talking about either, okay? So if we can get those extremes kind of like cleared, what do we mean by quality time? Well, here's what we mean. Quality time means this. It means making time, okay? That's just about as simply as we can put it. Quality time means making time. It's this universal principle for us that we make time for the things that we deem to be really important. We do. We make time for the things that are really important to us. So we make time to go to the doctor. If our health is important to us, we make time to do that. You take time off from work, you make arrangements, you go and you see the doctor because that's important. You made time today again for coming to church. That's important to you, and I'm grateful for that. We make time for recreational activities, and that's really important as well. Nobody had to tell you that there was a football game on yesterday, did they? Nobody had to tell you that the Iron Bowl was on because you made plans to watch it. Maybe some of you were even there with some of your loved ones, okay? We make time for the things that are really important to us and significant. And the same thing holds true for our loved ones, for the people who we go through life with. Again, those family members, friends, we make time for them. We plan on being together with them. And there are some of us for whom that is really the most important way we can love them. Again, for others, it's the words. We talked about them, last week. Others, we'll get to these other three in the next few weeks, Lord willing. But for some of us, for someone in your family, someone in your life, quality time is their thing. Even if it's not your thing, it's their thing. And so in the spirit of 1 Corinthians 13, love is about them. It's about the other person, right? It's not about, well, that's just not my thing, so I guess I don't have to love them that way. No, if they're in your life, God puts them in front of you and he says, love this person well. We have to really kind of dig in here and think about, okay, here's how I can do that. If their love language happens to be quality time. Years ago, I had a friend of mine who said this to me, and I guess you could probably tell quality time is probably like my number one or number two, because this thing really meant a lot to me, what this friend of mine said. He said, anytime that you call me, and I look down on my cell phone and I see your name, he said, unless I'm having surgery, I'm going to answer the phone. He said, if I see your name here, I am answering that call. I just want you to always, always know that. And that meant a lot to me, because that was my friend's way of saying, I'm going to prioritize time with you. If you ever need just a minute of my time, if it is at all within my ability to field that call and to talk, I will do that. That meant the world to me, because quality time means the world to me. Quality time is made up of two key elements. I want to show you this. Quality conversation and quality activities. So quality time, we said it's making time, and specifically it's making time to do these two things. Making time to talk together and making time to do things together. In a marriage, this might mean talking together while you're folding the laundry together, all right? You kind of like check both of those boxes, all right? Maybe that's not a quality activity, but you're doing something together, right? You get brownie points for trying. Maybe on the flip side, maybe it's going to the shooting range and having a great conversation about gun safety, That would be, kind of fish off the other side of the boat here for the guys. Whatever it is, it's about combining those two things, about quality conversation and quality activities, doing something together and talking while you're doing that. It's really, really kind of simple. With a good friend, I told you, like Chapman's book, it focuses mainly on the marriage relationship, but we're trying to expand this out. For a good friend, maybe it's something as simple as just arranging time for a monthly phone call. Those friends you have in college, those friends that you had, maybe early on in your 20s that you just don't see anymore because, he or she lives here and you live there. And maybe it's just trying to put a little bit of intentionality into connecting, having a monthly phone call with them and planning some sort of trip together next summer. There are a million ways you can kind of work this, but what we mean is making time for those two things, for the people in your life whose love language might be quality time. Chapman says this about quality conversation. He says, quality conversation is different from the first love language, which is words of affirmation. And he says this, I think this is significant. Words of affirmation focus on what we are saying. You with me? Whereas quality conversation focuses on what we are hearing. And that's an important distinction. So words of affirmation, that's what we say, but when we get into the quality time and quality listening and quality conversation, it's more about what we're hearing, what we're trying to hear and discern, because quality conversation requires listening. When we were first married, I learned the lesson that a lot of young husbands have to learn on this. Sunny's been teaching third grade basically the entire time we've been married. She's been a third grade teacher most of that time. And so, she'd come home, and it was before we had kids, and so it's just us. So we're talking, how was your day and everything. And so she would be telling me about her day, and she'd be telling me about some kind of problem, something going on at school, something with, this student who's, she's trying to teach, this, that, or whatever, just whatever the problems might be. And so, again, we're married, it's early on. I would listen for, a minute or two, and then I would just blurt out, hey, you ought to do this, this, and this, or you ought to do so and so. And I thought this was the most brilliant solution to her problem, If you would just, I've heard 30 seconds, that's all I need to hear. I know exactly what you ought to do. I know you spend all day in that classroom, and you spend all day with little Johnny, but I think I've solved this. I've cracked the code in just a minute. And I would blurt out what I thought was the best suggestion of all. And it didn't work. And it didn't work because Sunny didn't care about my solutions to her problems. I had learned the lesson that, number one, she's perfectly capable of solving most of her problems on her own, apart from my, genius suggestions. But even deeper than that, she just wanted to know that I cared enough to listen. It wasn't about trying to fix and solve every problem. That's not even really why she was telling me about the situation in the first place. She just wanted me to listen. She just wanted to know that I cared enough to listen. And I bet I'm not the only husband in the room who's had to learn that lesson, right? Some of you are getting ribs. Somebody Siri is speaking up right now. Whoever that is, you can come down forward in a minute too, because you obviously, Siri knows you maybe better than you do. We have to be taught how to listen sometimes, Ladies, you have to know this is just the factory setting. It's like the default mode for all of us as guys. When we hear the problems, we're going to, there's still times when, I'll jump in there and I'll catch myself, And then I've learned to kind of sit back and listen. And there's that rare moment where Sunny waits for me to actually say something. And I said, well, hey, I'm just listening. Wow, that's a really tough thing. I don't know what you're going to do. And she's like, no, this is a time where I need you to help me think of a solution. So we've kind of come around the barn and back again. There are those moments. But learning to listen, we all need to learn to listen. So here are 5 keys to quality conversation. If you want to try to do a little better at listening, here are a few helpful tips so we can love people well. Number 1 is pretty basic, but maintain consistent eye contact. That's just kind of like listening 101, right? You think listening begins with your ears. Well, kind of begins with your eyes. Maintain that good quality eye contact. Number 2, don't try to multitask while you're listening, and that's part of the deal as well, okay? I found that I can't really listen unless I have my phone off somewhere else. Because, you do that thing sometimes where you lay the phone down and you sit back and you listen, but it'll still light up. You can still hear it. It'll still make its sounds. It'll still vibrate and do all of the things that it does because your phone, it exists to be a distraction, It is engineered with algorithms, all things to constantly be that distraction. And if you're really going to listen, you got to put the phone away and you got to kind of dial in. And you can't multitask and do that. There's been a lot of research done about this, that people who think they're really good at multitasking are the worst people at multitasking. And so it's best to just sort of put everything away and really focus in and try to listen. And when you listen for this. Listen for feelings, not just facts. Listen for feelings, not just facts. This is where the real learning has to come in for some of us, I, in particular, was not raised this way. I was not raised to be in touch with my feelings. Unless it was anger, then that was perfectly acceptable. But otherwise, I can't imagine my dad coming home and sitting down with my mom or me and saying, let's talk about our feelings, I can't picture my dad doing that, so I come at this from a perspective of really being able to, for the longest time, just wall off my feelings, When we were first married, Sonny would tell me, if I was doing something and it was making her feel, in a way that was sort of negative, can you believe I actually said this? My immature response was well, stop feeling that, just change your feelings, because that's what I do when I feel something I don't want to feel, and that's not the way it works. Your feelings are your feelings. So you can listen for facts and information, but you also have to kind of ask the question, okay, what emotion am I hearing? And you can ask for clarification here. So, okay, it sounds like you're really hurt by that, or it sounds like you're really upset. Am I tracking with you? And boy, that's all it takes sometimes to say, yes, that's where I'm at. And the feelings are driving the conversation a lot more than the facts anyway. Do you know that? The feeling is what's really driving that conversation way more than the facts. And if this doesn't come naturally to you, I get it, but we can learn how to do this, okay? You can learn how to listen at that feeling level. Even if you don't do that, you can observe body language. And that body language is communicating a lot. So if the arms are crossed, if the fists are clenched, obviously tears and other things, those are telling the story as well. So you listen to the body language as well. And then finally, refusing to interrupt. If you want to be really good at listening, just let the person speak and fight that urge to interrupt. I used to do this so much, whenever someone would come in and talk with me and share some sort of problem that they were going through. Again, I'm not proud of this, but I'm just saying this, and maybe you can relate. After a few minutes, I was already working up my response. You ever notice that? After just a few minutes, I had already decided, okay, this is what their problem is. This is what I'm going to say. But now I'm just kind of waiting out the clock. I'm waiting for me to have the ball, so then I can respond. And one time there was a member of this church came to see me and talked. And within the first 2 minutes, I kind of had figured out what it was. And it took him 20 minutes to kind of get it all out. And whenever he finished, I jumped in with, again, my brilliant observation of what I was going to say. And he actually stopped me and he said, "Did you even listen to what I said?" Now that guy loved me enough to be honest with me, But I had to admit, no, I didn't. I listened to the first minute or two, and then I decided what I thought your problem was, and he just said, "Can we start all over?" And I said, "Please, let me have another crack at this." Chapman says that in the average conversation, a person only listens for 17 seconds before they interrupt, before they jump in with their response. 17 seconds. So maybe part of the way we can love some people well is just fighting off that initial impulse. Just let them speak. I've learned that a lot of times that's the issue. People just want to be heard. And by refusing to interrupt, we can let them share what's on their heart. Quickly here, quality activity. I want to talk about this as we kind of wind down here. This is just about finding something that we can do together. It's really not so much about the action, it's more about the intention behind that action. It's more about the connection that takes place while we take part in that activity. So really, almost anything we do can count as quality time if you're present and attentive to one another. To say it differently, it's about presence, not just proximity. It's not just about being in the same room, but it's about really being present, making yourself, available to someone. So if that's your love language, I would say you can make it easy for your loved ones by having a lot of ideas just ready to go. If it's just about being together, you can make it really easy for your loved ones. If you have suggestions of things, where to go, what to do, where to eat, all of that sort of thing. And if you have someone whose love language, someone in your life who's love language for them is all about quality time, then it's really easy to fill their emotional tanks. If you just do these two things, if you decide to be intentional and you decide to be present. If you prioritize just by planning ahead, that'll mean the world to them because they'll know that you invested some time in thinking about this plan. And then also when you're there to be present, to just lock in, to listen well, that shows love. So the sky's really the limit when it comes to the ways that we can share quality time with someone that we love. Some examples I thought of: going fishing with your grandson, taking your friend to dinner to celebrate her birthday, offering to babysit for your neighbors so they can go out to eat, going to the grocery store with your wife, watching Wheel of Fortune with your father-in-law. The sky is really the limit on the ways that you can do this if you're just intentional and if you're present. I want to close by giving you one more example from God's Word. And I want to close with this one because I thought it was the most powerful example of quality time that I can find in the Bible. And it's in kind of an unexpected place, okay? I'll have the verses on the screen for you, but go back and read this and spend some time on this a little bit later today. It's in Job chapter 2. And I want you to see what Job's friends do for Job here. We know the story. Job is living through the crisis of his life. And it says in verses 11 through 13, and when his three friends heard of all the evil that had come upon Job, they came each from his own place, and they made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and to comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they didn't even recognize him, it says. And they raised their voices, and they wept, and they tore their robes, and they sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven, and they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Here's what I want to show you out of that, okay? Here's what his friends did for him. They came to him. They planned ahead. You notice that line in there? It said they made an appointment. The way I phrase it, they all got together and figured out how they could all converge and show up at the same time to show love to this friend who was suffering. And when they got there, they wept with him. His tears on his cheeks became their tears on their cheeks. It's a powerful example. Many of you know what that's like because you do this. They sat with him. They got down where he was. They met him where he was. That's what all that, ashes and tearing the clothes, all that stuff. They met him where he was. And then they were present with him. They didn't feel the need to say anything, at least at first. In fact, it all kind of goes downhill once they start talking. But at first, the best thing they did is they showed up and they shut up. They didn't say anything. They just sat there with him. They were present with him in his pain. You look at those things, right? They came to him. They planned ahead. They wept with him. They sat with him, and they were present with him in his pain. That's quality time. Maybe they knew Job so well, they knew all they needed to do was just be with him. Maybe that was like their heart for him. We just have to get around him and surround him with love and support. And it's not even about the words that we say, but we just need to be with our friend. That is a great example of what we mean by quality time. There's a real gift that comes there, especially when we meet people in their pain. So my question for you today as we close, is there someone in your life who would benefit from quality time with you? Someone who's craving that quality time with you. How can you prioritize that in the days to come? God values this so much that he made provision for us to spend eternity with him. That's how much he values time. His eternal promise is a place where there is no more pain, no more tears, but only God and his people together for all time. Today, if you'd like to respond to the eternal promise of God by confessing the lordship of Jesus, putting Christ on in baptism, I hope that you'll come forward in the next few moments. Maybe there's something on your heart that you'd like us to be praying about as a church family. You can share that with us as well as we sing this next song. In the name of Jesus Christ, the sovereign Lord who makes all things new, he who has ears, let him hear. Let's stand now and let's sing.